Hey PSL, it's your Mayor Greg Oravec, and on behalf of our 5-person City Council, 1,100 plus city employees, and 200,000 or so of your fellow residents, would like to welcome you to our Hurricane Expo 2020. As many of you know, our Hurricane Expo is an annual event the city produces to help our residents and businesses learn about hurricanes and how we can mitigate, prepare, respond, and recover should a hurricane track towards, and heaven forbid, make landfall in PSL. We have had some scary near misses over the last couple of years, and it hasn't been that long since we were walloped by Francis and Jean or flooded by Faye. So we know that many of you are seasoned veterans when it comes to preparing for hurricanes, and we're counting on you to help our newer residents and any neighbors in need get ready, especially this year. As you are undoubtedly aware, this Hurricane Expo is different than years past as a result of COVID-19. It's not at every Hurricane Expo that I have a mask draped around my neck. We couldn't safely assemble with all of you, our special guests, community members, and vendors this year. But the need for the Expo and our shared need to mitigate, prepare, respond, and recover for a hurricane didn't go away. In fact, even though I'd like to wish that Mother Nature would cut us a break, to think that certainly we won't get hit by a hurricane this year while we're all dealing with COVID-19. The emergency manager in me, and in all of us, tells us and reminds us of Murphy's Law, and that this could very well be the year the big one doesn't turn away at the last minute. This year is the year that we have to be more ready than ever. Accordingly, that's what our Expo special guests and your team at City Hall want to help you do. We want to help you be more ready than ever. We want you to be as ready as possible. And before I kick it to our other presenters, our hardworking emergency management team has asked me to share the following points. Planning and preparing for a hurricane can be very stressful in normal times. We are not in normal times. COVID-19 is making, and will continue to make, our hurricane preparations more difficult this year. We might find that the stress level gets cranked up way past 10 on that stress dial. The best way for us to combat this reality is to have and execute our preparations now before we find ourselves in the crosshairs of a named storm. Tactically, we would encourage you to use home delivery, curbside pickup, and drive-through windows for buying disaster supplies. If in-person shopping is your only choice, please take steps to protect yourself and others while running essential errands. If at any time you feel like the added stress of preparing for a hurricane on top of COVID-19 and everything else is too much, please remember that dialing 211, just 211 on the telephone, connects us with a free and confidential hotline that can refer us to resources for food, mental health counseling, legal support, and much more. Lastly, a little piece of practical advice that I like to share. As a lifelong Floridian, I've personally experienced many hurricanes. I had just a firsthand experience. And they include the hurricanes that I've experienced include Andrew, Francis, and Jean. And in that experience, I found that if you make it through landfall and your roof is intact and you're not in a low-lying, flood-prone area, then if you're properly stocked up with your supplies and have a generator, then you'll likely find yourself in a relatively good position and well-positioned to begin the recovery efforts. But without fail, every hurricane season, tragedy, very avoidable tragedy, befalls people who were otherwise as well positioned as they could be. They were in this position. They had made it to the other side. The roof was still there. They weren't flooded out. They had all their supplies. They had the luxury, as good as you can get generator powering most of the house and maybe even some wall air conditioning units. They were in a good position, but avoidable tragedy befell them. And how? How could that happen? Because they didn't set their generator up outside with proper venting. They put it in their garage or someplace worse, and the carbon monoxide killed or severely injured them and their loved ones. So please, PSL, don't let this be you. Don't let this be us. I strongly encourage you to purchase a generator if you can afford one, but please ensure that it is properly ventilated and never operated within an enclosed space. PSL, in the face of any disaster, your team at City Hall wants to make sure you are ready so that we can survive, recover, and thrive. With these goals in mind, let's be as ready as we can be for the 2020 hurricane season. If the City Council and I can be of assistance with your hurricane preparations or anything else, please do not hesitate to call us at 772-871-5159. Again, that's 772-871-5159. Please know that if disaster strikes and things are at the worst, you can count on your city's emergency response team to be at their best. We hope that you get value out of this year's Expo. Be safe, be ready, PSL.
When a hurricane threatens our city, our Public Works Department is there, making sure that our stormwater drainage system is prepared. When working properly, the system provides a level of flood protection for homes, businesses, and other occupied and unoccupied structures. Throughout the city, there are many different types of drainage infrastructure, including swale liners and storm inlets. They all have the same purpose, to collect stormwater and direct it to a storm system, which in turn transfers the runoff to a canal or lake, eventually leading to the river. 5 days before an expected storm, Public Works will begin monitoring stormwater levels and make adjustments as needed. At that time, they'll also begin daily inspections to identify and remove any blockages found in waterways, pipes, structures, or bridges. Residents can help maintain proper drainage by inspecting their swales for erosion and by checking for any obstructions along inflow areas and pipes. Remove any trash, debris, sediment, weeds, or plants that don't belong in the area. As always, do not place any tree trimmings, grass clippings, or other yard waste out for collection at least 1 week prior to a forecasted storm impacting the area. And of course, never drive over a swale with a vehicle. Remember, it is the responsibility of the resident to maintain their grass and drainage swale. To learn more about best practices for maintaining proper drainage, visit us online.
Hello, my name is Christina Proulx. I'm with the City of Port St. Lucie Division of Emergency Management. I'm the Emergency Operations Administrator here. And today, Gustavo Vilchez from the St. Lucie County Emergency Management Program is here as well. He's their Emergency Operations Manager. And what we're doing today, as all of you know, with COVID-19, we're not able to have a physical Hurricane Expo this year. So we are having one virtually, and we're so happy that all of the community is coming together to prepare as one. And you'll see some videos today from different agencies and different departments to help you still feel that you have the ability to prepare together, again, as one community. Gustavo, thank you so much for coming out today.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this interview. On behalf of Ron Parrish, our Public Safety Director, we're happy to be here, and we're happy to be contributing in the safety of our community.
Absolutely. We've been one team throughout all these emergencies that we've had over the past few years, and certainly has only brought us closer together through COVID. So talking hurricane season, beginning in June and ending the end of November each year, we know that although we're not in the peak of hurricane season yet, it's still important for residents to remember preparedness, preparedness, preparedness. So let's talk through kind of what we're looking at this year. National Weather Service will do a full overview of hurricane season, but for our named storms this year, I know that we have 13 to 19 here. Yeah. For named storms, the hurricanes this year should be 6 to 10, and then major hurricanes 6 to 3. So certainly an active hurricane season. So today we're kind of just going to talk through some preparedness tips for residents. And I think the best thing to do is to start with before the storm. What do we want to do before the storm?
That's right, Christina. And as you know, with these COVID-19 impacts in our community, a lot of people may forget that we have to stay ready at all times should we get impacted by a storm, especially if it's a Category 3 hurricane or major hurricanes that can impact our area. So even though we have been feverishly working to make sure our community stays safe from the impacts of COVID-19, we are also looking at how to make sure that our sheltering operations also are handled in a safe manner with social distancing and also using protective and face coverings to be able to provide sheltering operations for those who need it should we get impacted by a storm.
And I think that's a wonderful thing for us to talk about today. As a nice timeline, let's start through very beginning before we have any named storms out there and what to do for preparedness. We always try to encourage residents, and I know you do as well, not to wait until a named storm is out there to prepare. It's still never too late. Let's see what we can do. So for COVID-19 preparedness, we're asking residents to not run to the stores last minute and buy as much as you possibly need for a week's worth of supplies. Remember, we used to say 72 hours. There would be nothing in the stores, right?
Well, you know, with COVID-19, it's been so many days. Now we lose track of the days, right? So as our community prepares for this hurricane season, now we're asking everyone to look into a 7-day supply to have as a kit, whether they shelter at home or they evacuate to a shelter. One of the things that we ask our residents is to plan for the kit and build the kit. So what do we mean by planning? Well, a family preparedness plan really starts with first find out where you live. Know your zone. Do you live in an evacuation zone? Do you live in a low-lying flood zone? If you do, then of course you need to look for a place that you can stay with. Now we highly recommend that you stay with family or friends. So now it's that time to socialize as much as you can with your family and friends.
Figure out which friends you want to stay with.
Exactly.
And I know that we talk about doing that if you feel that your home isn't safe. You mentioned low-lying areas. But certainly with our new emergency within emergency, so COVID potentially during a hurricane, we want to talk about moving through what that looks like. So do we need to leave our home? If we have a new built home and it's CBS, do we really need to leave if it's a Category 1 or a Category 2? And typically the answer to that would be, of course, no. So if you're not in any of those newer CBS built homes, then absolutely we encourage residents to, we're saying tens of miles now, not to evacuate to other states and to get on the highway, because the resources here within the county, and again, we love the partnership, are here. We still want to be able to take care of our residents within the county. We don't want anyone getting stuck on the highway, and if you have that ability to evacuate in tens of miles, or to go to a family or friend's house, absolutely, we encourage it.
Oh yes, Christina. You know, lessons learned have taught us that if someone was to leave their homes hundreds of miles, they will be in an unknown area. Yeah. They don't know what resources are available. Yeah. They may run out of gas. They may run out of their Go Kit supplies. So we always tell everyone, please evacuate tens of miles. Another thing to keep in mind, Christina, is that storms are unpredictable. So you may see a track coming our way, and then, you know, lucky for us, you know, they went somewhere else, like in Dorian or Hurricane Irma. And so we always tell everyone, please evacuate tens of miles if you must. Now, because of the impacts of COVID-19, now more than ever, we are asking our community, if you live in a home that is not in an evacuation zone, in a home that is not in the barrier island, in a home that is not in a low-lying area, then it's best to stay in your home and be safe at home, as we call it. In addition to this planning and in having a kit, we asked our residents to please also designate a safe room. So we normally say a safe room because of the impacts of a storm. Well, now include that safe room in case a family member becomes ill. And I'm not necessarily saying COVID-19 ill, But if someone gets ill, please, have like a safe room that can be a self-quarantine. So we encourage our residents that now is the time to plan. Another idea that has come up and a strategy is that if you don't have or you don't find friends and family that you can stay with, talk to your congregation. For those who attend church and faith-based services, talk to the congregation, see who you can plan to stay with. Again, it's safer and it's a lower risk of someone being contaminated from COVID-19 or any other illness if they stay safe with someone else rather than going to a shelter. That doesn't mean that we don't have shelters. We are also feverishly planning to add at least 6 foot social distancing. And I don't know the exact number right now, but it's an increased number of distance that now, according to FEMA and the state, they're requiring us to make sure that we have that distance. On top of that, we ask everyone that if you have to go to a shelter, please make sure you include in your 7-day supply face coverings for yourself and your family members, whoever you're bringing. Make sure you bring hand sanitizers. Make sure that you bring important documents like insurance, government IDs.
Medications.
Exactly,
Sure.
Medications.
Yeah.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So we did touch on moving from 72 hours to 7 days worth of food, but what else do we want to have in our kit? So we always encourage residents, like we said, to have medications, but let's not forget about our favorite family members sometimes, our pets. So we need to make sure that we are prepared as a community for our homes, our families, and our pets. And we really like to always encourage our neighbors. Do we have neighbors around us who maybe don't have the ability to prepare the same way that we do? Are they thinking about if they're putting up shutters, do they have the wing nuts for those shutters? Do they have the ability to put them up? If not, maybe do we have enough time to plan ahead to help them? And I think that's so important, and it's really, really neat to see our community come together and offer such a team effort, and I really love that about living here.
Another thing to remember that in the kit, make sure you have a way to communicate with your family and friends. And so when we say the plan, let's say a quick, simple plan would be is, if you are unable to call family or friends in an emergency, then it's best to designate a family or friend that lives outside the state of Florida that can be the point of contact to receive information from all family members. So that way, in case, let's say, you are unable to reach your family, you can call that point of contact outside of the state, and your family can contact that person. That person will then explain to them where you are or where to meet. So that's one way of communication. Another one that a lot of people forget is that you can also have small radios, handheld radios, to communicate with each other.
NOAA weather radios are great for that. I know Walmart sells them. You can buy them online. So so we're talking about two different things here. We're talking about weather radios and handheld radios. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay, because also you should also have some sort of weather radio. We highly recommend it. I know it may sound a little old-fashioned because everyone has their mobile devices where they can receive alerts from either local, from the city, or from the county, or from the state. However, if our communications towers were to go down temporarily for any reason, we want our community to stay in communication and receive alerts. And so radios are always important to keep in the house. Keep the batteries as well. A lot of people forget nowadays with Comcast and with all these AT&T services, everyone's so used to streaming services. Well, all that stuff goes away when the lights go out, right?
Those redundancies are so important to make sure that you have multiple ways of communication. And I think, so we just mentioned alerts. So I know that St. Lucie County has a great Alert St. Lucie system. And that's something that can be found on the city's website, on the county's website, and it's a really nice way to get emergency alerts to you in a timely manner. I know there's different options on there to sign up during certain hours of the day, but I can tell you if there's an emergency at 2 a.m., I certainly want to know about it if it's going to affect me. So I think it's a wonderful system to sign up for, Alert St. Lucie.
Absolutely. Now, I don't know what the website is for the city, but I know that for the county, someone can go to stlucieco.gov, and in there they'll find the link to register with what we call the Alert St. Lucie's program that we manage. And we send through that program the alert and notification of things like shelters will be opening, or things like, please evacuate when it's time to, and things like that. So we want to continue maintaining those alerts to our community. Another thing to remember is if someone needs assistance they need electricity to maintain their health, then we highly recommend that person or their family to register that person through the special needs shelter. And our special needs shelter here in the county is at the Havre Elfin Center. And to be able to register for special needs, you need to go to the website. We are not taking registrations on the phone. It's too lengthy, it's very hard. Also, we don't want people to come over to the EOC to register. As we know, we need to maintain that social distance. So now is the perfect time to go to the site, stlucieco.gov, find out about the special needs registry. It's listed in the site, and register. And now is the perfect time to do that.
It is so important.
I was going to tell you also too, you mentioned pets, right? Well, for those who have who are unable to stay with friends or family and they need to go to a shelter, well, Westwood High School is the designated pet-friendly shelter. And so someone needs to register as well through stlucieco.gov, and that way when they register, they can come into the pet-friendly shelter, which is Westwood High School, if the time comes. Now, again, we highly recommend everyone, please stay within your home if you're able to do so. Again, it's gotta be a concrete dwelling, away from low-lying areas, away from evacuation zones, away from the barrier islands, because we know that storm surge comes very strong in those areas. So that's the best way that we want the public to be aware of.
I think those are all very important things, and you say now is the perfect time, and it really is. Although we've already had multiple named storms, I believe Dolly was our last one, so we're already getting ready to go into our 5th named storm of the year, which is crazy to think already. We're not even through June.
It's a very busy season, Christina.
Yeah, it certainly has been. We're watching it closely. I know that you are as well. So we talk through a lot of before the storm, how to prepare, what to expect if you do go to a shelter, other options if you feel that you don't want to go to a shelter due to COVID-19 this year. So then we talk about before, during, and after the storm. So if we talk about during and after now, one of the biggest things for education and outreach that we always like to touch on each year is generator safety, and the fact that it's so dangerous to run a generator as it is, but we certainly never ever want people to run generators in their garages or in closed areas, because unfortunately every year throughout the United States someone does unfortunately die because they get that carbon monoxide poisoning. So we always want to educate residents that during the storm having a safe room is so important, to make sure that we're not running generators during or after in closed areas, because it's certainly a threat to life.
Sure. Another thing to remember that when it comes to sheltering now, because of the impacts of COVID-19, most likely if someone were to go to one of our shelters, they will likely see that their temperature are going to be taken. Mm-hmm. They're going to be required to wear face coverings. They're going to be required to maintain social distancing. I know we mentioned at least 6 foot or 6 feet, but most likely the shelters will have larger space, and our shelters are looking for ways to have some sort of barrier, so that way it's not everyone all jumbled up. We are looking for additional space because the typical capacity for every shelter, well, we can't maintain that. Now, typically, a shelter, which is one of our schools, which is run by one of our great partners, the school system, they are looking for added schools to then increase that social distancing. So normally we would find about 1,000 to 1,500 in capacity for a building in a school. Well, we're cutting that in half. Sure. And we're trying to find more space within the school system, within the universities, and other areas to make sure that we maintain that social distancing as much as possible.
We certainly, as a community, try to be as safe as we can, and I know that as a function of the county, sheltering does fall under your jurisdiction, and we've just been so impressed with how much you've been planning on that, and we want residents to know that we are working as hard as we can to keep them safe all throughout hurricane season. So let's talk post-storm. So before, during, and now we're talking after the storm. We know that depending on what type of impact we have, there's certainly different things that happen afterwards. I think a great example is in 2016 and 2017, we had hurricanes Matthew and Irma, and those came through, and those were actually low to mid category storms when they were supposed to be coming our way. And I think a lot of times residents, sometimes we give presentations and say, hey, what category storm do you think that was? And they say, oh, it was a 3, oh, it was a 2. We say, well, you know how it impacted our area? And that's what a lot of residents think, but it really came through our area per the National Weather Service as a tropical storm, and it still dropped 100,000 cubic yards of vegetation onto the ground. So that's a tremendous impact to our community with only tropical storm force winds.
And not to mention that Hurricane Irma dumped about 22 inches of rain in Fort Pierce in one night. So even though we were not directly impacted by that storm created impacts that were bad enough for our community that we had to open up a disaster recovery center, that we had to, we qualify for FEMA assistance, so we coordinated with our state and federal partners in bringing those recovery programs down to the county. So this season is a busy season. Don't let the Saharan dust fool you, because a lot of people think that Saharan dust clears things up. That's not the case. It happens every year. And I tell you, regardless of what the forecast is for the season, it only takes one.
Yes.
And, for those who can remember Hurricane Andrew in 1992.
I was there in Miami.
It was the first Hurricane Andrew of the season. That year, it was an El Nino year, a very strong one too. And we were told that because it was a strong El Nino year, supposedly there weren't going to be that many storms, and yet the first one came along and boom, it hit South Florida. So again, regardless of what the forecast is, now is the time to prepare. Now is the time to plan. Write it down, make sure you have your notes, make sure you have your equipment. We always ask everyone, don't just do everything like you mentioned and rush to the store.
Oh, it's so stressful.
Take your time.
Yeah.
Like for example, if you go to the store to buy your groceries, take your checklist of items to buy, which is listed in our disaster preparedness guide in stlucieco.gov on the site. And from there, you can guide yourself as to what things to buy. Don't buy everything, because of course we all don't have all the money in the world to buy all these things.
Sure.
However, if you stagger your purchases throughout 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you'll have everything you need before you know it, and you won't have to be in that rush at the last minute.
Now, a lot of residents take the Hurricane Preparedness Quick Guide too that we have on the city's website that we hand out at the Hurricane Expo each year.
Is that the pocket one?
No, eventually we need to make a better pocket one. This is a normal size, nice laminated sheet, and if residents want it, they can certainly call in for it, but it is on the city's website, cityofpsl.com. So I think between our two websites, there's such a wealth of information out there for hurricane preparedness. Really, really love the idea to stagger the purchases. So if your funds are a little bit tight right now, that's a great idea. Just put 10 of the items in your cart the first time and put 5 in the next time, and that also helps to make sure that we're not clearing the shelves, like we said earlier, right before we have a named storm. For those people sometimes who do like to procrastinate, and it is always such a less stressful experience if you were prepared.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And please, our community needs to understand, don't take it lightly if you see a tropical storm coming this way. Don't take it lightly even if it goes to a Category 1. And don't think that you have to be in a whole alert mode and wait until it's a Category 3. Don't do that. Start right from the beginning. If you see a storm coming your way, make sure you have all your equipment, your supplies ready to go if you need to evacuate or shelter in place. Now again, we highly recommend that our community, if you can help it, please shelter in place. Know your zone. And if you have to evacuate, please do not go hundreds of miles, stay tens of miles. You get to know Florida a lot more that way. Another thing that has come across is that because of COVID-19, the CARES Act funding will be now positively impacting our community. So a lot of people will be able to qualify for funding to be able to have PPEs or supplies to make sure that they stay safe from being contaminated or passing the virus on to others.
And when we say PPE, we're so good at acronyms here in emergency management, but we talk about personal protective equipment and
Yes.
what personal protective equipment can be. It can range from a number of different things, but essentially what you need to feel that you are safe during the pandemic. So we talk about face shields, face masks, face coverings. If you have eyewear, gloves, why not include hand sanitizer in there now and disinfectant?
Always get hand
Yep.
sanitizers, and always make sure you sanitize your home frequently.
Sure.
A lot of people have started forgetting once we were into the second month, third month of this pandemic to clean their house, clean the surfaces, clean the handles of the doors. Those are the most typical areas where virus can stay in there because everyone touches these areas. I try myself to avoid touching things, and
I'm
try to
getting
use
pretty good with my elbows.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, it is so funny. I tell people, you know, if I have a face cover, and tell them I am actually smiling inside.
You have to look at everyone's eyes.
Exactly, exactly.
So I thank you again so much for coming today, and emergency management just being able to partner together. We have, I think, a really good rapport within St. Lucie County, and we just want our residents to remember to be prepared and to be aware, to stay informed, to make a kit, to prepare their homes, their families, prepare for their pets if they can help their neighbors, to visit stlucieco.org or cityofpsl.com. And
you know what? There's one other website that's going on right now. So because of the impacts of COVID-19 to our community, we have a website that's live. It's been live now for, I would say, 2 weeks by now, almost 3 weeks, and it's called recoverstlucie.org. So in that site, what the designers of that site did is that they created residents in Port St. Lucie, residents in Fort Pierce, residents in unincorporated St. Lucie County, and in there they're putting all these links and assistance programs that everyone can look into, and we're hoping that it makes it like a one-stop virtual hub. So that way, whether it's COVID-19 impact, and hopefully we don't get impacted by a storm, but if you do, that site will be our first virtual hub. We understand that we cannot create a disaster recovery center in the typical traditional way of, you know, having everyone come to a site that we designate to obtain assistance for rent or for utilities, or, you know, someone has been displaced in their home. So because of that, we want everyone to get used to this virtual world. It's what they call the next normal.
Yeah. And that's kind of one thing we do say all the time in emergency management: the next normal, or the new normal, and what it looks like. And we're seeing the residents of St. Lucie County, Port St. Lucie, really making that change. I'm seeing more and more people wear face coverings out in public. It's so important to make sure that we're protecting ourselves. And it's no different during hurricane season. We want to continue to prepare, just like we're preparing for our pandemic that we're experiencing right now. We want to continue to prepare for hurricane season. So I think that's some really, really great tips we went through before, during, and after the storm.
Quite a bit, right?
Some great resources and great information to find and kind of help residents out throughout the hurricane season. And just remember that now is a wonderful time to prepare. We want to encourage residents to continue to do so. We haven't even gotten into the peak of hurricane season, and we're already going in almost to our fifth named storm here. So
knock on wood.
Yeah.
Hopefully we don't get impacted, but like I said, it only takes one.
Yeah.
And so we just want to make sure now that these next normal operations, or the next normal lifestyle that we're experiencing, that everyone gets used to having face coverings. We really want our economy to get boosted up. And so we don't want to go back to closing our businesses, closing our essential functions, or reducing them. We want to open them up, but with the new next normal operations. So we really are asking our community to help out, wear face coverings. I mean, I don't know how many times I've said that, and I don't mind repeating myself, because we know that if you cover your face and someone else covers their face, there is a very lower risk of passing any kind of illness. And I say any because at this time, even though COVID-19 is the biggest impact in a virus, when a virus impacts society, then every other illness becomes a major threat. And we want to reduce those influenza-like illnesses. We want to reduce the transmission of COVID-19. We want to increase our economy. We want our residents to begin enjoying St. Lucie.
It's certainly an interesting situation this year that we're dealing with multiple emergencies with the COVID-19 pandemic and hurricane season having potentially some impacts there as well. So we just want to encourage you to continue to be safe, be prepared. Remember your preparedness plans and your kits to prepare your homes, your families, prepare your pets as well for the storms, and always think about your neighbors. We're such a tight community here. Let's make sure that we're preparing together. We're not waiting to the last minute. I just want to thank you again, Gustavo, for coming on and just showing a wonderfully united front between the county and the city. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Christina. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be able to share this important information, especially the new one because of this COVID-19 impact. So thank you so much for having us here.
And next there'll be a nice video from a meteorologist from the National Weather Service, and he's going to give you a great overview of the hurricane season outlook for this season. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Kevin Rodriguez. I'm a meteorologist here at the National Weather Service office in Melbourne, Florida. I want to talk to you about the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season and what we can expect. Based on the latest warm sea surface temperatures, lack of wind shear, and the possible development of a La Nina later this fall, the Atlantic season for this year looks to be above average. We might have an active season as we go on over the next couple of months. The official NOAA forecast calls for 13 to 19 named storms, 6 to 10 of which could become hurricane, and 3 to 9 which could become major hurricanes of Category 3 or higher. It's important to note that the forecast does not predict landfalls. Any potential impacts to coastal areas here in Florida can only be predicted or forecast 5 to 10 days in advance. The forecast gives us an idea, an indication of the possibility of how busy this season is going to be. So it's important that we start our preparations now before any storms come close to our area later on in the fall. The first thing that we want to talk about, it's important to determine your risk. All tropical storms and hurricanes will produce a combination of damaging winds, flooding rainfall, tornadoes, and storm surge along the coast. It's important to assess whether you're in any of these risk areas, especially for the storm surge along the coast. And then for inland flooding as well, you have to be cognizant of that risk as well. Make sure that you have an active plan in place, that you know what you need to do if you need to evacuate, if you need to gather supplies. The time to do that is now. It's important that now when we have no storms, there is no rush to get supplies, that we can all do this in an orderly fashion as we move on into the heart of the season. I mentioned supplies. It's important to get enough food, water, medicine. You need batteries, radios, have cash on hand, and fill up your vehicles and have some extra fuel in reserve as well. Make sure to do that for all family members in your household, and don't forget about your pets as well. And help out any neighbors or other family members who might need assistance preparing their supplies for this season. Always be sure to check up on the insurance in your homes. Make sure that you're up to date, that you have the proper documentations, and check with an agent to make sure that all of your insurance papers are up to date. Make sure that if you live in a flood-prone area, that you've considered flood insurance, and know your policy limitations and information regarding that. And then we have to talk about strengthening our own home. It's important that you're ready if a hurricane or tropical storm is going to impact the area, that you're able to secure all of your loose outdoor items, that you've trimmed any large or overgrown tree limbs or shrubs, and that you make sure you have something that can cover your windows, whether that's plywood or shutters. Make sure that you're able to put your car in a secure location and that you can secure all the doors to your building, and make sure that your home is up to the hurricane standard code here in Florida. And as I mentioned before, it's important to gather all of this information and put down in a written plan. Have emergency contact numbers, places where you can meet up with family if you become separated, or have a place to go if you need to leave your area if we're under an immediate risk later on this season. Now is the time to prepare. There's no storms impacting our area now, and there's plenty of time to gather all the necessary supplies. It's important that we prepare now so that way if a storm does come to our area later on in the season, that we're prepared and we can act according and act quickly and do it with good pace. In terms of evacuations, always be sure to follow CDC guidelines that we've all been following over the past few months with this COVID-19 health emergency. And in terms of evacuations, always be sure to listen to your local and city, county emergency management officials. They're going to be providing you with very important information this season when it comes to evacuations and how to deal with the ongoing health crisis. So follow the local county experts and the local emergency management as they're going to guide you through the process if we have to go through that this year. And again, I can't stress enough, let's prepare now, because if we're prepared now at the start of the season, if we have to face a big one later on this year, we're all going to be prepared and ready to go. And whatever 2020 has in store, we'll be able to face it and make through it. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone, to the 2020 Virtual Hurricane Seminar. I'm Steve Weagle, the Chief Meteorologist at WPTV News Channel 5 and WFLX Fox 29. We want to get you ready for hurricane season. Of course, season runs June 1st through November 30th. We're hoping for a slow year. Last year, of course, Dorian was the big storm that everyone was watching. I always say to people, we're all kind of hurricane experts at this point, especially if you've been here for a few years, because you've likely gone through Francis and Jean and Wilma and Irma and Matthew and Michael, and of course Dorian last year, which came right up to our doorstep on Labor Day weekend, hit the Bahamas, sat over the Bahamas for about 34 hours, and then turned at the last second. At one point, the winds were 185 miles an hour. That is an incredible Category 5 hurricane. Very few hurricanes get up to 180, 185 miles an hour. Those are the sustained winds in Hurricane Dorian as it moved through the Abacos. So, yeah, some of you may have visited the Abacos in the past, Green Turtle and Hopetown and Marsh Harbor and Manowar, all those beautiful islands that are in the northern Bahamas that I know a lot of people here, actually boaters, will go and visit, myself included. So it's, of course, a hurricane that I don't think any of us will ever forget. So then it becomes an issue of not only the wind damage, but also the damage from flooding. And really kind of two types of flooding. There's freshwater flooding from the rainfall. You have a hurricane that stalled over Grand Bahama for almost 2 days, just dumping inches and inches of rain an hour. And you also have the effect of the storm surge with that persistent wind. I'm going to talk more about storm surge in just a minute. So Dorian, of course, the storm to remember last year. And if you want more information, you can always go to the Hurricane Center website. They will give you a complete breakdown on Dorian and the track and the intensity and exactly where it moved. But it came obviously right up to our doorstep, about 100 miles off the coast. That is the center of the storm. over around Freeport and Port Lacaya, and then it turned, pretty much did the right turn, a 90-degree turn, and moved north after that. All right, here are the hurricane names for this year, and we've already picked up several. It really depends on when you're watching this hurricane seminar, but as we do this at the beginning of the season, and they go in alphabetical order, male, female, and the list is recycled every 6 years, so you may recognize some of these names from 6 years ago. If they don't do a lot of damage, there's not a lot of death and destruction from them, they won't be retired, and you'll see them again 6 years from now. Okay, as far as the season, as I mentioned earlier, it goes from June 1st through November 30th. But usually we don't have to deal with anything in June or even through mid-July. The real heart of the season starts in mid-August and goes through mid-October, especially for Florida. So we'll start off with a possible storm every couple of years in the Gulf or the Caribbean in the month of June, maybe even before June. We had 2 named storms this year before June 1st. They usually don't last very long, and they usually don't get very strong, but it is possible. And then really from mid-August, August 15th through October 15th is when we really start to see the season heat up. That's when we see 70 to 80% of our named storms and hurricanes between mid-August and mid-October. And I always judge when I stop taking vacation around August 15th. So I like to get back here by mid-August, and then I'm safe that way. Because even if we don't get a direct hit from a hurricane, it's very likely we're going to get in a hurricane cone. Now, the cones go out 5 days. I'll show you those in a second. So even though it may not come real close to us, we still, once South Florida gets in a cone, everything gets ramped up pretty quickly with people heading out to home improvement stores and that. Now, there's also a second little bump between mid-October and late October, and you may remember Hurricane Wilma back in 2005. That was a late October hurricane. So there's a second little bump in the frequency of storms, and those are storms that typically form in the Gulf and the Caribbean, and then they kind of come in the back door and become a threat to Florida. So those are the ones that we have to watch, and usually we don't have a lot of time to watch them. The storms that form in the Atlantic in August and September, they have thousands of miles to gain strength, and we can watch them before they become any kind of threat here. But those late October storms, they can be an issue sometimes getting people ready. And by that time in the season, we're all kind of hurricaned out, and we don't want to deal with it anymore anyway. So hurricanes are rated on a scale from Category 1 to Category 5. Category 1's the weakest. As kind of a comparison, well, Dorian, obviously a Category 5 hurricane as it went through the Bahamas. Francis, if you were back here in 2004, was a Category 2. Jean, which was 3 weeks later, it made landfall here in September 2004. That was a Category 3 hurricane. And Michael, when it made landfall in the Panhandle 2 or 3 years ago, that was a Category 5 at landfall. That rapidly intensified in the Gulf. And, usually not only do we see more wind damage the higher the category, but we'll also get a higher storm surge. We can get heavier rains, more flooding from storms, and typically all hurricanes and, tropical storms that are trying to develop will have a tornado threat with them too, especially on the outer edges of the outer feeder bands, if you will. There's a term that we don't want to hear either as we go through hurricanes. When hurricanes threaten this area, all the meteorologists locally, we all go to the Hurricane Center because we don't want information on one station being different from another station. We want everything to be consistent. We don't want one station going, you know what, don't worry about this one, it's going to be fine, and then have us going, you know what, you better evacuate now. Everything has to be consistent. So we follow the lead of the Hurricane Center, and we also follow the lead of emergency management. They determine when evacuation zones get kicked in. And that's so everything's consistent. Now, there are TV markets out there where some people have felt like they can do a better job than the Hurricane Center. It doesn't work that way, and they usually fail, and there are usually big problems that arise from that. So we like everything consistent. Now, as far as so they give you 2 pieces of information that are invaluable. In that cone, they tell you where the storm's going to be from 12 hours out to 120 hours, so 5 days out. And they also tell you what the intensity forecast is going to be too. They do a fantastic job with the track forecast. In fact, the tracks have been shrinking, that cone has been shrinking for the last 15 to 20 years each year. It didn't this past year, more so because of Dorian and trouble or the challenges forecasting Dorian. And the intensity forecasts are still very problematic. So I always tell people, we'll run a scenario through you. Let's say a hurricane is forecast to make landfall here as a Category 3, 3 or 4 days from now. I would be thinking to myself, the most likely scenario is a Category 3 making landfall, but it could be a Category 2 or it could be a Category 4. Always give some leeway, and it can make a big difference, especially if you're talking the jump between a 3 and a 4. So you want to, I always talk worst case scenarios, because if you deal with the worst case scenario, if you prepare for the worst case scenario, you're going to be fine. If you don't, and you let it go and you think it's nothing, and a lot of people unfortunately still do, that's when you get in trouble. So prepare for a worst case scenario and you will be fine. You know, if you look back at hurricane deaths and injuries after the fact, you'll find that very few people who have prepared and are smart die or get in trouble, even in very strong hurricanes. It's the people who make mistakes and take risks. Those are the ones who get in trouble and end up in the hospital or something even worse. All right, just a couple of shots for you. I want to show you this first shot. You can see in Mallory Square in Key West. This is, there have been several Category 5 hurricanes that have made landfall in the U.S. And one of the most famous ones is the Labor Day hurricane in 1935, went through the Florida Keys. Flagler was building his railroad down to Key West, and there were about 400 or 500 workers building the railroad. The hurricane was so strong, it blew the train. This train was headed down there to save those railway workers, and it blew off the tracks as it made it to the Keys, and they all perished. And if you drive down to the Keys in Key Largo, in the median between the highway, you'll see a monument to the 1935 hurricane and the several hundred people who lost their lives in that storm. It's as you get on to Key Largo. If you're driving down toward Key West, it's on the left-hand side. It's pretty big. You can't miss it. It's a big monument, and also the photo is in Mallory Square, and you can check that one out too. Just a couple other shots of hurricane damage, you know, with Andrew and just the power. Which brings up hurricane shutters and preparing your house. You know, when they test hurricane shutters and glass, hurricane glass, they do it with 2x4. They don't blow wind at it. They shoot 2x4s at it. So, and I'm not joking. There are test sites. There's one in Riviera Beach. They put a 2x4 in a big cannon. They put a hurricane shutter up. They shoot that 2x4 out, and if it doesn't go through or penetrate it, they can pass. And the same with glass. Now, glass obviously will shatter, but hurricane glass, that 2x4 should not go through that glass. So it's also rated on the sustained winds. But the reason I bring that up is that it's this flying debris that causes a lot of issues in hurricanes and hurricane damage. It's not so much the sustained winds, but it's that coconut on the ground that gets lifted up at 150 miles an hour that's headed to your car or your house, a window. That's what does the damage. A coconut going 150 miles an hour can do a lot of damage, or a 2x4, or a piece of plywood. Or in the case of this building, we took a big hit. I'm at the studios. Hurricane Francis in 2004, the roof started to become compromised. We had big pieces of sheet metal on the roof flying. They're flying all through this area. They're like razor blades. They're like 6-foot long razor blades. It's the debris that can get you in trouble very quickly, and that's why we want everyone inside as a hurricane comes through. So there's several issues with a hurricane. Obviously, the wind damage is one. You also have the storm surge, which I'll talk more about in a second. You have the threat for tornadoes, and you have the inland flooding. Now, the inland flooding is the rainfall that comes down. And as I speak here in early June, we have spots in Martin County in particular that have 20 inches of rain in the last 2 to 3 weeks, widespread flooding. And we can see that easily, and we have in the past from hurricanes that have gone through this area. Now, a watch is issued, hurricane watches and warnings. A watch is issued 48 hours in advance. And that gives you enough lead time to get all your preparation. Everyone asks me, when should I put up my hurricane shutters? The best answer to that, and it's always not set in stone, but the best answer is when a hurricane watch is issued, because you now have 48 hours before the hurricane force winds are expected. You have 2 days, you should be able to get up. Now, when a warning's issued, that's 36 hours in advance, you should have all your preparations done at that point. You should have all your supplies, you should have your shutters up. It's just really last minute preparations at that point. So watch 48 hours, warning 36 hours out. And it's the same for tropical storm watches and warnings too. Well, let me talk about the forecast for this year. So the forecast is for, now this is a seasonal forecast. This is not done by the Hurricane Center, by the way. Seasonal forecasts are done by, well, NOAA does one. Colorado State University, Dr. Bill Gray, who passed away just a few years ago, he's kind of the godfather of seasonal hurricane forecasting. He came down to Miami in the 1950s. In the winter, you know, he was a snowbird. Everyone was like, well, I wonder what this upcoming hurricane season is going to be like. That's how he got into forecasting the seasonal hurricane forecast, because everyone was asking him, and he thought it would be an interesting thing to get into, and he was right. So he was really I call him the godfather, the wonderful man, passed away. Phil Klotzbach was his student, and has taken over and has really expanded on the hurricane forecast that he does. And then you have Penn State, you have Colorado State, NOAA. You have about 10 agencies that do hurricane forecasts. So they're forecasting most are forecasting above average season for this year. So we typically get about 10 to 12 named storms on average, around 6 hurricanes, and they're forecasting a few more above that this year. And it has to do with warmer water, and not just, people write me and they'll go, well, the water's really warm when I go to the Juno Beach Pier or the Lake Worth Pier. I mean, the water must be 90 degrees. It's not really relevant. Hurricanes aren't forming at the Lake Worth Pier. They're forming in the Atlantic, and those areas in the Atlantic, the Caribbean and the Gulf where the hurricanes form, those are the critical water temperature areas. So, and upper level winds, El Nino too is a big factor too. One key note, to have a plan. Know now if you're in an evacuation area or if you're not, and if you are, then you should have a plan now to know where you're going to go. My wife, but we live in the evacuation area. My wife goes to a friend's house. There's an old saying, run from water, hide from wind. So if you live near the ocean, run away from the ocean, get inland. And if you're inland, get in a well-protected house. And those evacuation areas typically don't go too far inland too. Here at the TV station, we're probably a mile from the beach. And this is not an evacuation area. This is an area that could flood, but as far as storm surge, all evacuation areas are determined by how far inland the storm surge will go. Saltwater inundation as it moves inland, and this area is not expected, even in a Category 5, to get it. Most areas are kind of US 1, but there are some exceptions, especially where there are rivers like the St. Lucie Inlet and Jupiter Inlet and down in Boca. We also have all the information I've talked about, and we have the list of supplies and emergency numbers and contacts in our online hurricane guide at WPTV.com, and you can check that out. It's just packed with information, and it's invaluable during the hurricane season. And we actually recommend, if you can, go now, print it off, and then you have it so if the power goes out, you'll still have a copy of it that you can use for reference. So hopefully I passed along a little bit of information to you. I appreciate you watching. If you have any questions, you can email me at Weagle at WPTV.com. Stay safe, and let's hope for a quiet season.
Hi, everybody. It's Mike Lyons from WPBF Channel 25 here in the First Warning Weather Center to spend a little bit of time talking about this hurricane season in 2020. And I wish we could all be together as we usually are at the Port St. Lucie Civic Center. I have to tell you, this event is one of my favorites every year, in part because of the passion that you all have for hurricane information. The fact that so many of you come to this event and support your community. You want that information. You want to be prepared. So tell you what, next year, let's all get together. In the meantime, we'll do it this way, which I'm afraid we've kind of grown accustomed to in the last few months, this virtual meeting, this virtual session, but we'll go through the session nonetheless. So we're going to talk about the 2020 hurricane season, and I'm going to begin with a look back at 2019. And can you recognize the storm behind me? I'm sure it's right on the tip of your tongue. This is Hurricane Dorian as the storm began to intensify. And there we are in Florida. We all remember that last week in August, the first week in September, when this incredible hurricane got into the Bahamas. Look how long it stayed there, almost 40 hours. And look how close it came to South Florida and the Treasure Coast. Somehow, a trough of low pressure, which was located in Georgia, and by the way, is not there most of the time in late August or early September, but through a stroke of luck, that low pressure system, that trough, helped grab the storm just a bit, turn it away from us, eventually came very close to North Carolina, but this was by far the headliner from last year. Altogether, the fourth most active year in hurricane history last year. So many storms, but again, Dorian, the big one. We did our hurricane special the other night, and we focused on the Bahamas and the recovery effort there. Boy, the road to recovery, long, hard there. Recently, the Bureau of Meteorology in the Bahamas gave a little speech, a little presentation, and he said that even today, 8-9 months after that hurricane hit, whenever there's a thunderstorm in the areas hardest hit by Hurricane Dorian, people there are still suffering from PTSD. They often break down in tears because of this devastating storm, which, as we know, came incredibly close to us. So what can we expect this year? Unfortunately, as you know, we're off to a busy start already, and this year looks like it's going to be busy again. This is the forecast from NOAA, calling for as many as 19 storms. By the way, there's 21 names on the list. So if we get to 19 or 20 or 21, could be in that period like we were in 2005 when we ran out of storm names. Let's hope that doesn't happen. Up to 10 hurricanes and maybe 3 to 6 major hurricanes. Now, the folks at NOAA are one of about 24 organizations that issue these seasonal hurricane forecasts. A lot of groups do it, and they include universities like Colorado State, North Carolina State, private meteorological firms. You may have heard of AccuWeather. They put out a forecast. And countries, too, like Cuba, the United States. This is the United States forecast, and Great Britain. So how do they do it? How do they issue this seasonal forecast, predict storms and hurricanes months in advance? I recently talked to Dr. Phil Klotzbach of Colorado State University, who talked about the 3 key factors. Factor number 1, water temperatures in the Pacific Ocean. It may seem odd that meteorologists look at the Pacific Ocean to forecast tropical systems in the Atlantic. But it turns out sea surface temperatures in the Pacific, especially near the equator, are a key factor in hurricane forecasting. When those waters are warmer than normal, it's called El Niño.
When those water temperatures there are above average, what it then does is it alters upper level wind patterns in such a way that it brings strong upper level winds that tear apart hurricanes as they're trying to develop and to intensify.
Right now, those tropical waters are near normal, what scientists call neutral conditions. But in the coming months, forecasters expect the sea surface temperatures to cool. That's called La Niña, and it means no wind shear in the Atlantic, allowing hurricanes to form and strengthen. Factor number 2, water temperatures in the Atlantic Ocean. Meteorologists examined the sea surface temperatures just off the coast of Africa and as far north as the Iberian Peninsula. If these waters are warmer than normal during the spring, it suggests an active hurricane season.
Basically, if you have warm waters in the eastern Atlantic drives lower pressure, which then drives weaker winds blowing across the tropical Atlantic.
That feedback loop leads to very warm waters in the central Atlantic Ocean, the prime breeding ground for big hurricanes. Factor number 3, analog years.
When we do analogs, what we're looking at is basically which years in the past had conditions similar to what we currently see, and especially what we anticipate we're likely to see for the peak of the season.
In other words, to predict the future, study the past. Claude Spack's group at Colorado State University came up with 5 analog years, including 2008, a season that produced 8 hurricanes and 5 major hurricanes. All of the analog years were very busy hurricane seasons with large, dangerous hurricanes. So again, this year looks a lot like 2008. And if you were in Port St. Lucie or the Treasure Coast back in 2008, you'll remember Tropical Storm Faye, which produced so much flooding. And then we also had Hurricane Ike that year, a storm that thankfully moved away from us, but did indeed hit Texas and produce quite a bit of storm surge damage along the upper Texas coast. So how accurate are these forecasts? Well, they turn out to be pretty good, but you know, the key question, and even though there's some great science here, the question they can't answer is Port St. Lucie going to get hit by a hurricane this year? Is Miami going to have to deal with a big hurricane? No one can answer that question. So don't get caught up in all these numbers. What really counts is not how many storms, but where they end up. If we have, for example, 19 storms in the middle of the ocean, who cares? But if we have one storm here, we're going to care a lot. And a good example is 1992. In 1992, there were only 4 hurricanes. That's below the average of 6. But one of those storms was Hurricane Andrew. You know, last year it was Dorian. The year before, it was this storm, Hurricane Michael, just an incredible monster, a Category 5. And last year, during the spring, we went to Mexico Beach to film one of our hurricane specials. And we saw the devastation from that storm. And you'll see an example of that in just a second. But this hurricane, a Category 5, we've seen a lot of Category 5s in recent years. And I recently spoke to 2 scientists who think we're going to see more hurricanes that big, but they both have very different reasons. Here's that story. Last year, it was Hurricane Dorian, a Category 5 monster with winds reaching an incredible 185 miles per hour. The year before, Michael, another Cat 5 that devastated Mexico Beach in Florida's Panhandle. Hurricane Michael, a rare Category 5 hurricane, made landfall right here. Can you believe all of this area was underwater? And all of the slabs you see, former homes washed away by the powerful storm. And in 2017, 2 more Cat 5 storms, Irma and Maria. All told, there have been 6 Category 5 hurricanes in the last 4 hurricane seasons. That's never happened before. But 2 hurricane experts say large, powerful storms are going to be much more common in the coming years.
It's not rocket science. You make the oceans warmer. It's the heat of the oceans, of the tropical oceans, that provides the energy that intensifies these storms.
Hurricanes get their energy from warm water. The warmer the ocean, the more fuel to power the storm.
It's not a coincidence that over the past 5 years, during which we've seen the warmest temperatures on record for the world's oceans, we've also seen the most intense hurricanes on record. We can clearly see the fingerprint of human activity, of human impact on our climate in these monster storms that we're now seeing.
Just warmer sea surface temperatures by themselves do not make more hurricane activity.
Goldenberg, a veteran research meteorologist, says the increase in Category 5 hurricanes is not because of a change in climate, but a natural cycle in the oceans.
Above normal activity for several decades, below normal activity for several decades, and right now we're in a high activity era since 1995. If we had no man-made contribution whatsoever, no additional man-made CO2 in the atmosphere, we're still going to get devastating hurricanes. We've had them for hundreds of years, recorded history. We're going to continue to have them. It doesn't take that to create a devastating hurricane. While we're in this cycle, there's going to continue to be a lot of major hurricanes.
Yes, indeed. We are going to see a lot of major hurricanes, but when you look at hurricanes in general, a hurricane from a weather standpoint is still a relatively rare event. Let's look at some of the weather phenomena taking place. For example, lightning, something we deal with all the time this time of year. It's not uncommon here in Port St. Lucie, Fort Pierce on the Treasure Coast in one thunderstorm to get thousands of lightning strikes. And when you add them all up over the year, and we can count every one across the entire country, around the entire world, there are billions of lightning strikes. So it's very common. How about tornadoes? May of 2020, usually the most active month, by the way, for tornadoes across the country, is relatively quiet, which is some good news there. But on average, the United States sees about 1,000 tornadoes. But when it comes to hurricanes, the hurricane season is 6 months long, starts in June, runs until the end of November. We're looking at thousands of miles of ocean, the Atlantic, the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico. But on average, you only get 6 hurricanes. It takes a special series of circumstances all coming together to produce a tornado, or a hurricane. So let's talk about the setup. You need first warm water. If you're a cook, you're going to cook something up. Most of the time you're boiling the water, right? Well, that's the same way it works for hurricanes. You need the water temperature to be at least 80 degrees. Now, around here off Hutchinson Island, for example, it's 80 degrees most of the time, but in the deep waters of the Atlantic, especially out in what we call the main development region, which is in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean between 10 degrees north and 20 degrees north, all the way to the Caribbean from Africa, water temperature there takes a while to warm up. That's why August and September are the peak of the season, because by then the water temperature is warm. So then you need some rising air, you need a little disturbance, you need a high pressure system kind of keeping things relatively calm, and that allows the storm to develop. And as we head through the next few days or so, a tropical system forms, and before you know it, we're going through the different stages. It starts with a tropical depression. You know, we're watching a system. It starts to get a closed circulation. The winds are about 35 miles per hour, up to 39, and at that point, it's a tropical depression. Then, when the winds get above 40, it's called a tropical storm, and at that point, we give it a name, and the names from the World Meteorological Organization are decided on across the areas that we watch, the Atlantic, the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico. So we use French names, English names, Spanish names. So Cristobal, for example, is one of the names that we saw used already this year. Bertha is another. So that's an example. The next name on the list would be Dolly. Then the names are usually short, easy to pronounce. The idea is to remember the storm. So if we have more than one, which can happen a lot during the peak of the season, which is September, then you want to differentiate between the different storms. Then we get a hurricane, and we have 5 different classifications of hurricanes. A major hurricane would be Category 3, 4, or 5, winds in excess of 115 miles per hour. So bottom line, hurricanes, thankfully, are rare, but when they do happen, they're the greatest storm on Earth. More power, more energy in a hurricane than any other type of storm. In fact, if we could harness that energy, let's say we have a Category 1 hurricane, not a major hurricane, just a Cat 1, if we could harness the energy output from that storm in a 24-hour period, we would have enough energy to power all the homes in North America for 6 months. So these storms are phenomenal, the greatest storm on Earth. They're amazing, but thankfully they are pretty rare. So as we embark on what is likely to be a very active hurricane season, it's really important that you have a plan this year, a family plan for you, your family, for your business, and that you have some flexibility in that plan as well, because given the COVID-19 pandemic, given the fact that we may have threats from multiple storms this year, you need to be flexible, and more so than ever before, you need to be prepared this year. You can also count on us, obviously. We're going to be there for you. We were there for Dorian, we were there for Irma, we were there for Matthew for you, and we'll be there again this year, providing the coverage that you've come to expect from us. We'll give you the facts, we'll give you the information so that you can make intelligent choices for you, your family, your home, your business, for everyone involved. That's our goal. Your safety is our #1 priority. That's what it's all about for us. So that's a little primer on hurricanes, little Hurricane 101. Don't want to scare anyone, just want to give you some facts. Again, it looks like an active year. Don't get too caught up in all the numbers. Just remember, it only takes one storm, but this year, more than ever, it's really important that you have a hurricane plan. Thanks again for watching. Again, I hope to see you in person next year. And until then, I'll see you on TV.
Port St. Lucie Utility Systems is here for you in any kind of weather, but there are some things you can do at home to get through the storm. For our sewer customers with a grinder or step system, we recommend that you conserve water during a power outage because the water going down the drain or toilet will quickly fill up your grinder or step tank. Without power, the wastewater can't be pumped out of the tank. To prevent your tank from quickly filling up, only flush when absolutely necessary. Avoid taking long showers and running the dishwasher or washing machine. Some folks fill up their bathtub during a storm to help flush their toilet. That won't help during a power outage. It will, though, quickly fill up your grinder or step tank because, again, without power, the pump will not activate. Utility systems will make every effort possible to pump out or pump down a customer's grinder or step system during the recovery period after a storm. Those residents on gravity sewer are also encouraged to conserve water during a storm. A sewer backup into your home is less likely, but still may be possible if a lift station loses generator power. Customers may use a portable generator to power their residential grinder or step system during a power outage. However, connecting a portable generator directly to the grinder's electrical panel is prohibited. Customers must consult with a licensed electrician to install the appropriate equipment to enable the feed to go through the home's electrical panel. A personal generator must be a minimum of 220 volts or 6,500 watts. As for our water customers, avoid the long lines to purchase water and save money too by filling up containers with your tap water. Our water is treated by reverse osmosis and purified with minerals like many bottled water brands on the market. Our water plants operate and deliver water to your home at 60 to 80 psi. If distribution system pressure drops below 20 psi during a storm, a precautionary boil water notice is issued. A drop in water pressure may be caused by a line break, equipment failure, or generator failure. Staff makes every effort possible to reduce the possibility of a drop in pressure. However, in the event there is a drop and a precautionary boil water notice is issued, our water customers will be notified. And self-serve emergency water supply depots will be made available to residents who may not have access to water during a storm. Port St. Lucie Utility Systems is dedicated to providing outstanding customer service. If you have any questions or need more information about preparing for hurricane season, please visit utility.cityofpsl.com or call 772-873-6400.
With hurricane season comes a sense of urgency to prepare. But there's one thing that's easy to overlook: what to do with your trash and recycling. Well, to make the prep work a little easier, we've put together these handy tips to help get storm ready. Before a hurricane, one of the most important things you can do for your home is to secure all loose items in case there are high winds. That means stopping all yard waste maintenance and tree trimming activities when there is a named storm with a predicted landfall. Bundling and tying down all loose items such as tree limbs, wood planks, or building and roof tiles. It's important to place these materials where debris cannot become hazardous to homes and automobiles. It's also important to remember to place your trash and recycling containers in a secure location. Keep in mind that WastePro will continue to collect household trash and recycling materials according to schedule until a hurricane warning is issued for the area. Once a storm has passed, there are a number of things you can do to ensure the smooth restarting of trash and recycling collection services. Be sure to separate regular household waste from storm debris. Everyday items like food, recyclables, and other household waste should be treated as you normally would, while storm debris, including tree limbs, soiled carpeting, damaged fencing, and appliances, should be placed curbside in separate piles. Separating properly will allow WastePro to collect household garbage more quickly and safely, and help prevent odors and other safety hazards from impacting your surrounding area. Separation is also necessary to allow other firms to collect storm debris in accordance with arrangements made by the City of PSL. WastePro will restart curbside trash and recycling collection of normal household waste as soon as it is safe to do so. Check for the latest updates on storm recovery within your community by visiting the city's website or social media outlets. As community members, we also proudly support local recovery efforts ensuring affected communities can thrive again. Neighborhood Services and WastePro thanks you for doing your part to keep our community safe this hurricane season.